if each step in that series requires a certain amount of time greater than 0 and that certain amount of time remains a constant. So say, for example, hours. There cannot be an infinite number of hours in the past. And during the Q&A, you can ask me more about that to expand on that if that doesn't make sense to you. But there's some references for your own enjoyment. Now let's begin with this origin of nature. If something has a beginning to its existence, then it must be caused by something. And our whole system of science is based on this, this causal principle, and not just science, but logic. We see the causal principle operative in logic, in logical deduction. We see the causal principle operative in mathematics as well. But there is the other option, of course, is that things can begin to exist with no cause at all. And so, for example, if we heard a loud bang out in the hall, someone could say, what caused that bang? And I could simply say nothing. But I would argue that that's an irrational answer. It doesn't make sense to us. It's also definitely a science stopper, because the moment you say that this effect here has no cause, you immediately exclude science from having anything to say about that effect as far as explaining it, explaining how that effect originated or began. So in general, I'm working under even in quantum mechanics, that everything that has a beginning to its existence must be caused by something. Nature, it appears, had a beginning to its existence, and therefore it logically follows that nature must be caused by something. And that's the problem. What is that something? If you grant the first two propositions, and the probability that they are both true is very high. We can't say it's 1, but it is very high. Then you have to logically grant the conclusion, proposition number 3. So now we come with a dichotomy here. The cause of nature must be either natural, that is, it caused itself, or it must be non-natural, in other words, it's supernatural. So those are our two options. But the 5th proposition states that nature cannot cause itself to come into existence. In logic, there is this fallacy known as the circular argument, and that occurs when you assume your conclusion in your opening premise to prove your conclusion. And of course, that's a fallacy. Yet I see many very, very intelligent people trying to find a natural explanation for natural explanations. Natural explanations are entirely based on space-time, matter, and energy and the laws of nature, which it appears to us had a beginning to its existence. So we have an effect here, that is nature, and we have to explain what caused nature. Now there are other approaches. For example, some people would postulate that there are many universes. Our universe is just perhaps the result of a quantum fluctuation at the event horizon of some other universe, and it goes on. But even in that scenario, you cannot have an infinite number of universes going back into infinity past. Under that scenario, you still must have a finite series to traverse. And so when I'm talking about physical reality or nature, if you say this universe is a one-off deal, then nature is space-time, matter, and energy and the laws of nature. But if you hold to the multi-universe theory, then nature would include this whole system of multiple universes. That would be what I would define as nature. And ultimately, even in that scenario, we still must have a beginning. And so nature, we still have to explain what caused nature to come into existence. And since you cannot assume the existence of nature in your opening proposition to prove that nature caused itself, which is logically impossible, you have to go with the second option on the dichotomy. It's something non-natural that brought nature into existence. Non-natural, which I am also referring to as supernatural. If you grant proposition 4 and 5, then the cause of nature must be supernatural, must be a non-natural cause. And I'm going to call that alpha for the time being. Now, since alpha caused physical time, alpha must be able to exist independent of physical time. And the reason for that is the same as basically to avoid the circular fallacy again. You cannot assume that alpha is dependent on its existence, is dependent on time for its existence in order to bring time into existence. Otherwise, neither will ever exist. That's a circular fallacy if we're going to assume that alpha is contingent on time and therefore is able to bring time into existence. Whatever alpha is, it exists in a reference frame within which there's no time. And that being the case, it follows that it must be timeless, but it also must be beginningless. Let's postulate a reference frame. This is our space-time continuum here. And here's the ultimate reference frame. We're going to call this reference frame alpha. We have space-time in this area here. But in this area here, there is no time. But if you're going to ask, what caused alpha, or did alpha have a beginning, what you're immediately assuming there was a time when alpha did not exist. Then something caused it, and now it exists. But of course, there is no time here. You cannot have time here in order to bring time into place here. So therefore, it follows from that alpha is timeless and beginningless. And it also follows from that it cannot be caused by anything. Because the moment you say, well, what caused alpha, you're assuming there was a time when alpha did not exist, then something caused it to exist, and now it exists. But you've smuggled time back into this reference frame here. And if you really want to smuggle time into this reference frame, then this reference frame here must have a beginning to its existence, and therefore you must also have another reference frame that ultimately has no time. So you're still stuck, no matter which way you would like to go. Just using Occam's razor, appealing to simplicity here, I would like to just suggest this universe is a one-off deal. There's no point in appealing to a large number of unseen, untestable entities to explain this one here, if in fact we're now left with explaining the existence of a large number of unseen, untestable entities that we know would have to have a beginning to their existence. Ultimately, you got to arrive at a reference frame within which there's no time, an eternal reference frame. Proposition number 11 is that alpha must have an intelligent mind capable of designing the universe to support life. And here's some figures given by Penrose that suggests that the probability that this universe is an accident is that number right there, 10 to the 10 to the 123rd power. And that's why many people would postulate that there are almost an infinite number of universes. It's not actually an infinite number, but a very large number. And if you have a very large number of universes, then probability that you get one that's capable of supporting life, then gets a lot better. Maybe it gets closer to 1. He's not suggesting that here. He's just coming up with some figures, and these figures change all the time, so I wouldn't bet the farm on these exact numbers because they're constantly changing the more we learn in theoretical physics. Proposition number 12 is just gathering together these sub-conclusions, concluding that alpha is an eternal, uncaused, and intelligent creator of the universe. However, that is God, and that's analytically true. Analytically true means it's true in virtue of a generally accepted definition for God that's found across many cultures throughout history and throughout many religions as well. It's not necessarily a Muslim God or a Christian God or a Hindu God. It's not, that's more a detailed, more a specific notion of God, but this is a general notion of God. With that in mind, the logical conclusion is that the cause of nature is God. That is, an uncaused, eternal, and intelligent creator that had some point in mind for the universe, and that point seems to have something to do with life, in virtue of the fact that the universe appears to be incredibly fine-tuned such that it is capable of supporting life. That is a very quick argument for the existence of a general notion of God from the origin of nature itself. And Hawking makes a little statement there about some possible religious overtones and how scientists prefer to shy away from the religious side of it. Now I want to look at an argument from design, and what we see here is a molecular machine, kinesin, walking up a microtubule, and kinesin transports material from the central region of the cell into outer regions of the cell, and the load is attached to the top. There are many of these molecular machines. This is a very simple one compared to many molecular machines in your body right now, and we'll see a little bit more about that shortly. First of all, a paper published just a few years ago arguing that chance and necessity do not explain the origin of life, and the reason that they hold this is that all known metabolism is cybernetic. This is the abstract, this is their concluding sentence in the abstract. And this is their reason. It's cybernetic, that is, it's programmatically and algorithmically organized and controlled. Essentially what they're saying is it's computer code. And computer code requires that for every point in that code there is a decision being made. And whatever is producing this code must be aware of the different options at each switch point and be able to encode this into the genomes of life. This is the basic summary of their argument. Now, that's just